Hey guys, what's going on? So I wanted to cover the life of Jason Todd, or later known as Red Hood. And there's a few different continuities and different versions of canon as to what events and at what point they took place during his life. So I'm going to briefly cover all of those, but mostly it's going to be focused on the post-crisis comics because I really think that's where the bread and butter of his character is. And a lot of other projects or different versions of him are heavily focused on that version. So really we know for Jason Todd that he had a pretty rough upbringing starting from his immediate childhood. He was born to a father who was in prison. His mother was a drug addict, or his biological mother wasn't really in the picture. So he pretty much was left to fend for himself at an extremely young age. And he took to the streets to do this. He started robbing cars and selling the parts just to make ends meet. He did this for his mother previously, and then after she passed away, he continued to do this, and he kind of just found a little abandoned apartment or a little spot to live in. We meet him first in the story in the comics at 11 years old. That's when he starts stealing the tires and the wheels on the Batmobile, and Batman eventually catches him in the act, stays around and waits for him to come back to the scene and finish the job. And that's really where we get our first introduction to him and where we get our first meeting with Batman. Batman initially followed him to his residence, felt remorse for this kid's situation, asked him where his parents were, learned about his tragic story, and then he initially put him into a nearby boarding school. Later found out it wasn't really that good. It was really just a cover for a criminal organization. And that's really where Bruce Wayne decides to take Jason back to the Wayne mansion and really takes him in as his own, almost like his son. We knew around this time that Dick Grayson wasn't really in the picture anymore after he suffered a pretty serious injury, and then he eventually left his role as Robin, or Batman's sidekick, and joined the Teen Titans. So Jason eventually became the second Robin. After about 6 months of pretty intense training, Batman, or Bruce Wayne, then again awarded him with the mantle of Robin and gave him his costume. So he would be around 12 years old when he officially became the second Robin. Lasted a fairly long amount of time as Robin, really leading up to the incident when he was 15 with the Joker. And I'd say what really ends up happening, what really takes a turn for the worst, is when he does get captured by the Joker. That's really what has a drastic impact on his life. And just the story behind it, you have a few different versions. You have the version where his mom was an aid worker in Africa, and Jason learned of this and went to go help her, and then they ended up getting kidnapped by the Joker. Or you just have the story in Gotham where the Joker really committed some pretty heinous crimes, and Jason Todd didn't think Batman was doing enough, so he took matters into his own hands. He went and confronted the Joker himself, and that really led to a bad decision that ended up the Joker just torturing him in an undisclosed location. So really at this point in his life, Batman kind of considered it as a failure that he let both Jason down and that he let the Joker capture him. And so he really took responsibility for it. He didn't really know what happened to Jason. You have in many different of the continuities, Jason Todd actually physically dying from both the Joker's torture or the bomb that he set off, and he wasn't able to disable it in time. So it really also took a huge toll on Batman as well. But then a year later, this is when we get the Under the Red Hood story, him getting revived with the Lazarus Pit with Ra's al Ghul and his daughter Talia. We also get even him just coming out of the grave. He somehow was able to resurrect himself. So whatever difference we have him through that 15 to 18 year period is where he comes back to life. And we also know in that about 3-year period, depending on what continuity you're looking at, that he traveled the world, almost like Bruce did before he returned to Gotham and became Batman. So that's where Jason had his own version of this, and that's where he also really took it a step further and became such an excellent marksman, pretty much training with world elites in different weapons control, different sharpshooting, stuff like that. And then 18 is where he makes his ultimate return to Gotham, and that's where he now carries the mantle of the Red Hood. And then we get, usually around that time, that's when we get him confronting Batman, really where he has his reign on Gotham, taking over a lot of the organized crime. And so really he was just Batman without any rules. He used guns. He wouldn't be afraid to use lethal force. And then he started the crime war and was in control of it, got rid of drugs and all of that stuff. And he just believed at this point that because of what happened to him, he didn't think Batman was doing enough, since the fact that the Joker was still out there, since the fact that Batman was just able to go and find another replacement for Robin. But really after that, it's not as clear what exactly happens. And I think it's a little bit interesting just looking into some of the stories in the comics. For instance, we know after he faced off with Batman, he usually still kept his mantle of Red Hood going. We see, for instance, in the Gotham Knights, he's about 22 years old. That's a little bit of an extension from where he's at that 18-year-old point. And in Arkham Knight, he's about 20 to 22. And then even beyond that, we know at about 25, he just took the role of Batman into his own hands to replace Dick Grayson, who was really the next Batman. Doesn't really turn out so well. You have a few instances of him getting even arrested from the police and then breaking out. So still had a rough life, even into a little bit more of his later 20s. We even know at age 26, after experimenting with the mantle of Batman to compete with Dick Grayson, he then tweaked his suit a little bit and became the Red Hood 2.0, a pretty similar costume to that original. And then we even have a few instances of him reconciling a little bit, toning it down a little bit, and then leading a group called the Outlaws. So that would pretty much be around his late 20s. And then going back to a few different continuities, you originally had a different origin story to Jason Todd. He was basically Dick Grayson 2.0. He grew up also in an acrobatic family who would do performances at the circus, and then the death of his parents led to Bruce taking him in. So I'd say it was just really too close. And you even had that instance in the original, they had that call in for fans, whether there was like a vote. It was pretty close. I think it was about maybe a few hundred more that he ended up dying in the comic. So that's why they went with that route. And I think really why you had that crazy resurrection of him, because there was that initial heavy backlash to his character, but then his character really grew on people, I think, with that new identity of him. And I'd say if we're looking to mimic Jason Todd's story in the future with just a different version of him or a more proper live action adaptation of him, you do have him in Titans, but I wouldn't say that's anything comparable to what maybe his portrayal in a new movie would look like. And I think you have a few different options on what you could do. I think the whole storyline of him dying and coming back is a little bit far-fetched. Maybe you could do something like that in James Gunn's universe that is a little bit more in that fantastical element. Or I think you could just do him as a grounded antagonist. You could just kind of follow a similar storyline to the Arkhamverse, where he's tortured and captured by the Joker. Everyone thinks he's dead, he just disappears, but he's able to survive that. But you don't have him just, coming out of the coffin or going into the whole pit and all that kind of magic stuff. I think that could be interesting. But what I really like with his character, I really like the more good side of him, or him coming back to that moral code in the Gotham Knights storyline. I really think something like that would be great. And then him working with the Bat family, working as a team member, I really like that portrayal of him. But yeah, I really think they nailed it with a lot of different trial and error that was kind of just played out. And I think you really do have a good addition to the Batman universe and an interesting character, an interesting take even on Batman himself. So feel free to let me know your thoughts on Jason Todd's life, his different continuities, what you think about his character overall. Really appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you later.